Welcome to our channel. Today I will be showing a 2011 biopic, comedy, drama film called The Untouchables. Spoiler ahead. Be careful and take care. Late one night in Paris, Dries is driving his employer Philippe through the city. When waiting in traffic becomes too boring, Dries breaks the speed limit and starts driving quite fast, dodging other cars and ignoring traffic signs. This leads to the police chasing him, and Dries bets €100 that he can lose them, but after driving under a bridge, the police ambush them from both sides. Dries doesn't seem too worried though, and this time, he bets €200 that he can get them an escort. The police released the car to him and he then started acting abusive and telling them that Philip couldn't move and that he was taking him to the hospital. The officers find evidence of this when they find the wheelchair in the truck, and when they approach Philip they find him convulsing, also an act. Seeing this as an emergency, the police excuse Dries for breaking the speed limit and offer himself as an escort on the way to the hospital. To celebrate winning the bet, Dries plays September by Earth, Wind and Fire, and when they reach their destination, he shares a smoke with Philip as the police leave. Dries promises he'll handle it and drives them away just before the hospital staff finds them. This friendship started many months ago. Philip and his assistant Magali are interviewing to find him a new caretaker, but it's not going too well, as all the applicants have very standard or awkward answers to their interview questions. But they were suddenly surprised when Dries stormed, ignoring this fact that it's not her turn yet, because she just wants to sign some papers saying they won't hire her so she can get unemployment benefits. He is blunt and somewhat rude, even insulting Magali, but Philippe finds him amusing and tells him to come back the next day for his signed papers. Dries returns to his home in a humble neighborhood and tries to take a bath when his younger siblings pester him, only making it in time thanks to his sister Mina, who is a bit older and more responsible than the others. While waiting for their mother to arrive, she looks out the window and notices her brother Adama getting out of a suspicious car. When the boy enters the apartment, he just says he was at school and leaves with his bag, making Dries even more convinced he's up to something. In the evening, his mother arrives, and she presents him with a Faberge egg that he stole, and tells him that she's gone on vacation when he asks. She's not happy to see him though, because he's been missing for 6 months and never called, and now he's showing up somewhere like his house as a hotel. Since she is completely done with all his lies and has other children to take care of, he kicks her out and tells her not to come back. Dries spends the night with some neighborhood friends smoking and having some snacks. The next day, Dries returns to Philippe's house for his papers, and is received by the housekeeper Yvonne, who shows him around the place and tells him about Philippe's daily routine, also showing him the room he will have to himself. Very own bathroom. Dries can't help but stare into the bathtub before being dragged in to see Philip, who offers a signed sheet of paper but also a job offer. Dries accepts a 1-month trial, and Philip tells her he'll bet she won't last 2 weeks. After bringing his things to his room, Dries is taught how to take care of Philip. She needs to learn how to prop up her legs, how to get her into a wheelchair, how to help her bathe and change her clothes. Things get awkward when Dries discovers that after Philip uses the bathroom she must put some high stockings on him and even clean his butt, but no matter how much he complains and says he won't do these things, he ends up until accepting them as part of his job. Later in the evening, while he is enjoying a snack on the terrace, he is interrupted by Philippe's daughter Elisa and her boyfriend Bastien, who are looking for a private place to make out, and he throws them both out after they refuse to share his beer. Dries quickly gets used to the daily routine with Philip, even if at first he makes mistakes that he learns from, such as handing the phone to Philip instead of holding it to his ear or forgetting the baby monitor in the shower. She has also learned to organize her mail into different folders, most of the letters she opens for Philip, but there is a series that he is not allowed to see. When he finds a flyer promoting female escorts, he decides to start a file for them instead of trashing them like Philip said. Although it's not all work in this new life, Dries still makes sure to have a good time. He keeps trying to hit on Magali and sometimes calls the escorts to join him in bed. One morning, after Yvonne comes to his room to scold him for being late, he finds some dangerous weapons in his bag, but he doesn't comment on them yet. Dries' job today is to drive Philip around, but he refuses to put him in the back of a van like he's freight, so instead, he drives him in a fancy car that doesn't see much use. Philippe, who at first thinks it's not appropriate and says they should be realistic, soon warms to the idea of a faster, less boring ride, though Yvonne still refuses. When they try to leave the building, a neighbor parks at their entrance, ignoring the sign on the door that says it's forbidden. Dries wasted no time going after the man, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and threatening him until the car moved. Philip is impressed by his actions, but Yvonne, again, refuses. The pair visit a museum, where Philip plans to buy a piece of art that Dries thinks isn't worth the money because it's a red stain on the canvas. Later, Philip meets one of his relatives, who tells him that everyone is worried about Dries because he can be violent. He also discovers that he has a criminal record, but Philippe doesn't care. He admires Dries because he doesn't pity him and doesn't mind joking with him. After another failed attempt to hit Magali, Dries eats dinner with Yvonne in the kitchen while Philippe writes a letter to Magali. Demanding a private conversation, Yvonne turns off the baby monitor and proceeds to explain what's going on. Philippe is dating a woman named Eleanor. These letters he won't let Dries open. But he never met Eleanor in person. Their relationship was complete epistolary. Speaking of love, Dries teases Yvonne for the look Mollier gives her before bed. He's trying to sleep when he hears some strange sounds coming from the baby monitor. Philip is having trouble breathing. Unable to ignore him try as he might, Dries goes to his room and gently guides him through the attack with soothing sounds and a wet cloth to wipe his face. Philip eventually falls asleep, only to wake up again after a while, needing air. This time Dries does not hesitate. He puts Philip in a wheelchair, covers him with a blanket and takes him for a walk by the river. It's the first time Philippe sees Paris at night in a long time, and now he's more relaxed. He explains to Dries that the medicine can only do so much and that he sometimes feels phantom pains. When they see some girls walking by, Philip also admits that he is not able to please a woman due to his situation, but he can still enjoy some satisfaction while massaging her ears as they are sensitive areas. When the phantom pain threatens to reappear, Dries shares one of his joints with Philip, who is skeptical at first but ends up loving it. Later, they go to a restaurant, where they share a meal and have fun, and Philip decides to share more of his story. He met his wife when they were students, and shortly after they married, she suffered 5 miscarriages and was diagnosed with an incurable, chronic illness. That's when they adopted Elisa. Philip has always loved competition, extreme sports and speed, and a paraglider gave it to him. It was during a paragliding session that bad weather caused him to crash and break his vertebrae, though he still thinks his real handicap was not the chair but living without his wife. After so much fun, Philip remembers the date and realizes that Dries has passed his 1-month trial, so he is now officially hired. But he has to start by retrieving the Fabergé egg that he stole because it was a gift from his wife. She gives him one every year, and he has exactly 25, their timing matched. The next day, Dries goes to talk to Mina when she's out of school. He's a bit upset because she hasn't answered his messages other than asking him to look for eggs. He also tells her about some cops who called their home. Later, he meets Adama, who admits that he has found 30 grams. Dries wants to take her to lunch, but Adama refuses and instead gets into the same suspicious car from earlier. Later, Dries is allowed to be present when Philippe writes his letter to Magali for Eleanor. She thinks this purple prose is so boring and Philip should be more direct. She's surprised to hear that it's been going on for 6 months and they've never exchanged a picture. When he finds her phone number in a letter, he takes it as a sign and calls her, forcing Philip to pick up the phone and finally talk to her beyond the written word. Their conversation goes so well. Philip is now on the phone with her, even just before she and Dries appear at the opera, during which Dries laughs and makes fun of the dress. The next day, Dries convinces Philippe to exchange pictures with Eleanor and chooses one of them in a wheelchair. Later, while he is painting, Elisa comes into his room to ask him for a cigarette and mocks him for trying to be artistic. Enraged, she kicks him out before going to see Philip, who is currently asking Yvonne to change the chosen picture for one of hers when he wasn't a quadriplegic. She hides the photo inside the escort file just before Dries enters, complains about Elisa and tells Philippe that he needs to discipline her, with Yvonne agreeing. Philip agrees to talk to her, but she is mostly surprised when Dries lets her paint. Days go by, and the friendship between Philip and Dries grows. Dries takes her to play in the snow and brings her with him when he goes out for a run. Philip gets her his first suit and scolds his daughter while Dries listens to her through the baby monitor. When Dries finishes his first painting, he shows it to Magali, who slaps him when he tries to kiss her. Philip, however, likes the painting and promises that he will try to sell it. The two of them have a great time with each other, enjoying things like getting a fast car, sharing joints, and even hiring escorts together. When Philip's birthday comes around, he isn't too excited about it. Every year, she pretends to be surprised that they're throwing a party and has to meet all these relatives who only come to see her on dates that she's still alive. Philip says it will all be boring. While he and the guests enjoy some live classical music, Dries searches for Elisa, who is crying in her room after taking some of Yvonne's pills, which won't kill her as he expected. Her sadness is that Bastien broke up with her and called her a tart, so she asks Dries to talk to the boy, which she accepts for a price. Meanwhile, Philippe is showing his relative Dries' painting and convinces him to buy it for 11,000 euros. Dries goes back to the dining room and chats with Yvonne, who tells him Magali is in a relationship with someone named Fred, but things are rather rocky at the moment, giving Dries hope. As the party begins to wind down, Philip forces Dries to sing some of the most important songs in classical music history, but he can only joke in response. After the band finished, he brought out his iPod and played Boogie Wonderland from Earth, Wind and Fire, before he started dancing right in the middle of the floor. She is an incredible dancer and even convinces the rest of the party to join her and dance with her, which Philip enjoys watching. Later, while tucking Philip into bed, Dries opens Eleanor's latest letter to him. He sends her pictures, showing that she's pretty, and tells him they should meet when he goes to Paris next week. When the day of the date arrives, Yvonne and Dries put Philip through dozens of dresses until they find the perfect one. And since Yvonne will be the one to take Philippe on a date, Dries uses his vacation to visit Bastien and threaten him until the boy apologizes to Eliza and brings her croissants every day. She also asks him to fix her hair. Later, he visits his mother at work, but only to see her from afar. At the restaurant, Yvonne and Philippe are waiting for Eleanor, who is very late. After an hour of waiting, Philip gives up, calls Dries to pick him up, and then leaves the restaurant without noticing that Eleanor is arriving at the same time. That same night, Philippe takes Dries on his private plane and gives him the money he got from the sale of the film, making him immensely happy. They reach the countryside the next morning and Philip decides to go paragliding, dragging Dries along with him. Dries wants nothing to do with it, but after being initially annoyed, he enjoys the experience. When they return home, Adama waits for Dries and is scolded by the scar on his face. Although Adama still won't tell Dries what's going on in her life, Dries makes her wait in his room while he tells Mina not to worry and puts Philip to bed. Philip, however, was still awake. After Dries sees a painting with her, she asks him about his family, which Dries doesn't want to talk about at first, but eventually gives in. It turns out that Adama isn't technically his brother and his parents are actually his parents, they're his aunt and uncle. They brought him from Senegal when he was 8 years old because they had no children, and his real name is Bakari Basseri, but because other children had that name they called him Idris and it became Dries. One day, her aunt miraculously managed to conceive and after her uncle died, there were other men and more babies. As Dries talks to him about Elisa, Philip mentions that Adama needs discipline, so he fires Dries so she can be there with her family because she can't take care of an old man her whole life. The next morning, after Bastien brings his daily croissant while wearing a better hairstyle, Dries prepares to pack his bags and leave. Magali comes to say goodbye to him, and when Dries tries to hit him one last time, Magali introduces him to her significant other, Fred, short for Frederick. It turns out Magali isn't interested in men, and Dries gives up on the spot to leave the house. In time, H returns the baby monitor to Yvonne and teases her for lying to her about Magali. In return, he gives her the escort file she started and is disappointed to find the picture he chose is hidden there. Dries throws away the file, but he keeps the picture for himself. Once outside, he finds another car blocking the entrance, so he tells him to move even though he no longer works there. When Adama calls him out on it, Dries says it's a matter of policy. A few hours later, the two brothers take their mother to the station when, back at home, Philip is having his first dinner with his new caretaker, who is stuffy and boring, and Philip decides to leave him. But since Yvonne goes out on a date with Molly, there is no one to scold her for it. As the days go by, Dries returns to his old life. He hangs out with his old friends again and tells the guys from the suspicious car not to bother Adama anymore. When she goes to an interview she doesn't have enough experience, she calls herself pragmatic, and manages to win over the employer using all the industry knowledge she gained while working for Philip. This gives him a job as a driver. Philip begins to dislike his new caretaker and is constantly in a bad mood. One night, he refuses anyone in the house to help him with his fantasy pain, so Yvonne calls Dries and asks him to come over. This is how they find themselves in the situation from the start, with the police chasing them first and then taking them to the hospital. After that little adventure, Dries takes Philip to the beach and the sea view helps Philip calm down. Moments later, Dries takes care of Philip's overgrown beard before taking him to a restaurant for lunch, but he doesn't stay, as someone else will be keeping Philip company today. Dries wishes him luck and gives him back his egg before finally leaving, and Philip begins to worry about being alone until he sees who his date is, Eleanor, who is delighted to see him and doesn't mind the chair. The original Count Felipe Pozo de Borgo now lives in Morocco, has remarried and has 2 daughters. The real Dries, whose real name is Abdul Yasmin Sello, owns her own farm and has 3 children. The two continue to be very close friends today. With this, the story ends here.